Should we do a retreat in Tuscany? Know your why, as always. I think when in doubt, ask ourselves, why am I doing anything? Why am I going to run this retreat? Why do I want to do that? And then what outcome do I want people to have at the end? And how do I want to facilitate during this time? You're really in receiving mode. That's the power of a retreat. A lot of the times when I make decisions, I check in with my body. And this is definitely the wisdom of the somatic practices of yoga for so long.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Ula with Heart and Bones Yoga.
I'm Brea with Heart and Bones Yoga.
Okay, we are going to be talking about yoga retreats. We are just fresh, I want to say fresh off the press, which is like not the right word, but we're just back from Tuscany. So we just had our retreat in Ebbio. So Brea, having just come back from Tuscany, I actually want to start somewhere else. I want to talk about why you actually stopped doing retreats in the first place. You used to call it being on a retreat retirement, which I know was a big part why people were so excited that you decided to host again. Before we jump in, like why we're doing retreats, I just wanted to ask what made you step away from them in the first place?
There's so many reasons why I retired and stopped doing retreats, because I had done a lot over the years and a lot of different types of ones, like definitely like day retreats in the cities that I lived in, weekend retreats outside of the cities that I lived in, and then of course international retreats in other countries. And I've also done a bunch of different styles of them where it's like, again, that weekend residential retreat or international retreats where you're at one retreat center the whole time, you don't go anywhere else. But then I've also done a bunch of ones where it's almost like a yoga retreat tour because we're going to different places in a country. For example, we did that with Iceland and Croatia a couple of years in a row. And each has their own benefit, but that was a lot of years of doing it. And there's something for anybody who's run retreats. What happens is what I call like there's a real rigamarole with them, meaning like you put a lot of money out front. There's the deposit, and I'm talking more like international retreats for sure, but even a weekend retreat, you still need to put a deposit on the place. You got to organize all this stuff. So there's a lot of risk up front. And then the rigmarole is, okay, we've got interest, but is anybody actually signing up? Or some people sign up and then they cancel and then they switch. And it doesn't always just magically fill up. And that's the part that's kind of frustrating. And after enough years of doing it, I got to the point where it's like, wait, if I want to travel, I'd like to travel not working, because a retreat, and we'll talk about that a little further in this conversation of just the perception of, oh, I get to have a vacation too. No, you don't. It's still work. And it's lovely work. It's a beautiful setting wherever you are, but it's still work. And so that whole rigmarole of, are we going to fill it? If we don't fill it, or if you just sort of break even, yeah, you've got this trip, but you've made no money on it. And yeah, you're in this other country, but it's, there's a lot to consider. And I think enough years of the rigmarole where I also simultaneously had just launched Heart and Bones Online. I was like, I'm doing a lot of other things. And the work of running a retreat was too much. So, oh yeah. And that also timed out because in 2018, 2019, my family and we went and traveled while I taught. I did a little like tour around Europe, workshop tour around Europe and the UK. So I'd spend almost a year traveling and teaching, not work, not retreats. Actually, I did do a couple of retreats within that year of teaching. So I think between like traveling to different countries, organizing and teaching workshops, which were great, and then throwing retreats in it, it was a lot. And I think I was just like, I'm over this. And then not long after that, the pandemic happened. And that was like the final nail in the coffin. I was like, great. Thank you, world. That's extra reason why I do not want to run retreats anymore. So really the last retreat I ran was I think it was Croatia in 2019. And then that was it until now.
I also, while we were planning this retreat in Tuscany, just moments being like, oh yeah, right, this is why I stopped doing retreats. And not that we didn't have this amazing time going to Tuscany, but there's a lot of back end work that has to happen for a retreat to be successful. And it's kind of easy to forget about it when you get really like caught up in like travel and you're like, oh, of course I want to go to Bali or something, right? But like, there's a lot of back end work that has to happen, even knowing like, are there allergies? Like the unsexy part of planning a retreat, deciding what we're gonna, invest in as as an online studio bringing something to life. So knowing that kind of like that was the reason that you took a pause, what actually made you decide to come back, and like why this specific location, I guess we could talk about, really like what changed and made you wanted to host another retreat after, yeah, since 2019, I guess, all these years.
Yeah, a lot of years separate. And I had no intention actually when this started, meaning that, so the way the story goes was, I'm on Instagram. And as a yoga teacher on Instagram, I do get a lot of DMs from retreat centers and sports gear and garbage companies that are trying to, like, you can be an ambassador for blah, blah, blah. So quite often I don't even look at that. I don't even look. And because they're all message requests, it's not, so I don't even necessarily open up the inbox or look at that. But then I think this was just so magical in the end, because for whatever reason, so Ebbio is the retreat center that we went to in Tuscany. And for whatever, they did what they need to do, is like reach out to teachers and be like, hey, do you want to do a retreat here? And for whatever reason, something told me to open it. And I even remember in the moment, I was like, ugh, why am I opening this? Why am I even bothering? Like, what are you doing, Brie? Like, and then this other part of me was just like, open. Anyway, so I open their Instagram, I open the message, I look at their Instagram, and I'm just like, within an instant, I was like, oh my God, this place is gorgeous. And so then I went to their website and then I sort of priced it out for fun. I was like, okay, if we did a retreat here, how much would it cost roughly? And I did some rough math and I was like, well, it's not so bad. I'm sure we can find people to fill this up. And I think I like either texted or emailed you, Ula, and was like, should we do a retreat in Tuscany? you know? And it just was a very clear yes. And so the way I always like to make decisions, a lot of the times when I make decisions, I check in with my body. And this is definitely the wisdom of the somatic practices of yoga for so long. I have a pretty good barometer or antenna of like if I have a physical somatic yes or no. And when I thought about it, like, do I want to do this? Knowing what we just talked about and knowing the reasons why I retired, I'm like, is this, despite the rigmarole, the back end admin, all the things, do I want to do this? And I got a very physical, like clear yes in my body. So we just took the leap and did it.
Yeah, and I remember when you first approached me with it, we started looking through kind of the documentation that they sent us, and their organization like helped a ton because it just felt the lift on our end was less. Like just knowing, okay, here are all the things they already recommend for our attendees to do in their free time. Here are all the like add-ons here. It felt really more like a menu we could choose from, and it didn't feel like I used to do a lot of events and event planning. And so for me, seeing the level of organization on their end, also I was like, ooh, this makes our planning a lot easier. So like now that we're back, looking back at what we did, what do you think made this specific retreat in Tuscany so successful, that you decided that you want to do it again? Because we're going to do the same location in Tuscany, but in the spring this time. So why are we going back? What made it so good?
I know, to go from retreat retirement and be like, I'm never doing another retreat again, to out of the blue being like, okay, maybe let's do this. Let's take this leap. To honestly, even like within the last days of the retreat, I was like, okay, I need to check in with them to see when they're available again. I need to come back here. And also for me, as like, I love, like, travel is something I really love to do. And there's not a lot of places in the world that I want to return to. Not that I didn't love them, but I also have this view of like, well, wait, if I'm going to travel, I want to go somewhere new because there's just so many other places that are beautiful in the world. So there's only actually a handful of places I would return to in a heartbeat for a variety of reasons. So I was actually even also surprised at myself that I was like, instead of not just being like, oh, I broke the retreat seal again, like, okay, I liked it. It wasn't so bad. The rigmarole was worth it. Let's do another retreat. There's this part of me that would have usually been like, okay, where's the next place? Do we do another Tuscany one? Do we go somewhere else? But very clearly for me, it was such a special place. It was such a lovely place to be on so many levels in so many ways that I'm actually a little bit surprised that I was like, and 7 months later, let's go back to the exact same place.
When you say like it was a special place, I think people might hear that and go, "Oh yeah, sure, sure, sure." But it really, to me, was like a magical location. It's like it's like a valley in the forest in Tuscany, and you're like close but not too close to anything. So if you just wanted to like chill the whole day and just like recuperate, you can. But if you wanted to go do a wine tour, you can as well. And maybe it was the time of year. I know that was one of the reasons we like the idea of April. It's a shoulder season, so like, the temperature was perfect. It just everything about it felt easy and gentle and just flowed really naturally, I felt like, for us. That said, I think a lot of people imagine that yoga retreats are just like these relaxation long naps by the pool kind of vibe places, but there's often a lot more that goes into it or you can do. So I'm going to ask you, as if I don't know this, how did we approach the structure of the days, and how do you think people should look, or what should people look for when they're choosing a retreat or planning one of their own? I know we put a lot of thought into like, what should a day look like at this retreat?
Yeah, well, to back that up a little bit, the so actually you had said April, but it was October that we were there, but the next one's going to be at the very end of April. So just in case somebody got confused.
No confusion.
But shoulder seasons, either spring and fall, work really well for us. So it also, I think, bottom line, figure out what kind of retreat do you want to do? Do you want to do a weekend retreat? Do you want to do a day retreat at your local studio or renting out a space, or a weekend retreat an hour away from where you live in a beautiful retreat center? Right. That's going to be similar and yet different than an international retreat. And so there's actually a couple answers within this, because let's say within the international retreat setup, I feel like there's two options. The most popular option is what we did with Tuscany, what I've done in different countries, which is you go to a retreat center. And as you said, that retreat center usually does a lot of the heavy lifting. They, like the one thing I liked about Ebio, like they had all these beautiful photos for us, because this is the other thing with it. I booked this retreat center without ever being there, and there's a little bit of a risk. I think it's actually kind of a low risk, because they had reviews online. I just knew this wasn't going to be a bait and switch and we get there and it's horrific. And actually, even side note of the side note, like as we got there before everybody else and they're giving us the tour, because I thought those photos sold me. I was like, sign me up, I am going. I felt once we were there in person, those photos undersold it. Like I felt like my jaw was open on the floor as we're giving. I'm like, this is so really, like, it's even better in person. So we lucked out on that. So that's the retreat center experience, where it's usually just set up where you're there at the one place and you stay there the whole time. And it's really actually quite an easy lead in for those who are new teachers to do. I've done the other style where in the last couple of years, those Croatia and Iceland retreats that I did, I partnered with a friend of mine who had a yoga retreat company called Breathe and Life. So any of you listening who had been on those retreats, it was so fun, wonderful. Breathe and Life is not really running retreats quite in the same way anymore. They'll do an annual retreat with my dear friend Kat, co-teacher in our teacher training, who takes people to Nepal every year for a trek. So Breathe and Life, anyways, wonderful, good. But my friend Melissa used to be a tour guide with another tour company for years and years and years, doing more like party retreats, like things, when you go to Thailand or you go to the Philippines, and it's like these party trips in a sense. So partnering with her, who had that different experience, was really great, because I could show up as a teacher and not have to deal with the logistics. So how we did those ones was, first of all, Iceland and Croatia were two countries that I felt you couldn't just stay in one spot. It was a waste of the country, especially Iceland. If we had just gone to a retreat center in Reykjavik, you're only getting a tiny bit of the glory and magic of Iceland. So for us, what we did on those retreats, a lot more intensive, a lot more work. Melissa had to go ahead of time and like scout out all these different locations, because we would stay at different guest houses, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 nights at a time. I can't actually remember if these were 7 or 10-day retreats or 8.
I was gonna say this sounds long. Like versus like the Tuscany one is
5.
5 nights.
Yeah.
Yeah, so manageable if people want to travel before or after, which I felt like a lot of our attendees did. Like they either checked out Florence or Rome, like we did, or one or the other or both. So it's like 5 days means people can still do their own vacationing if they want.
Yeah. So when you're adding this, as you're listening to this, dear listeners, and you're thinking about retreats for yourself and the pros and cons of the different things, that's a night, like, so between these two setups, I think for the most part, actually, most people listening are going to go, and I actually recommend and suggest that our first setup, which is go to a retreat center. You can have it be 5, 7, those can even be 10 days if you want. But when it's at the one spot, I think doing the ones that we did with Breathe in Life, which were a little bit more travel-y, because again, we didn't do, like, especially in Iceland, Iceland doesn't have the infrastructure. It's not set up as a place, including Croatia, actually, where it has a ton of yoga studios or like nice retreat center-y spaces to go do yoga in. So we we did it 3 years in a row. The first year we rented 2 SUVs. I think 12 or 14 people was our max. Rented 2 SUVs. Melissa's driving one, I'm driving the other. We're doing, because you have to see, if anybody's been to Iceland, you have to drive to see all the wonderful sights. And then I think our last 2 years was like we rented a big Sprinter van, which actually I drove and I loved it. I loved being this, I felt like a tour guide driving this Sprinter van all throughout. And so that was a little bit nicer to, anyways, I'm going into the logistics of it all, but that's a lot of logistics in that type of retreat. And you're really, as the facilitator and guide and teacher, it was wonderful to have somebody else there with me, Melissa. So having a co-partner to help out on that really intensive experience. You don't get a lot of free time to yourself as a teacher and facilitator. You're with the group a lot, which has its pros and cons, I think, depending on how you're wired as a person. I enjoyed it. It was fun, even though I'm actually quite an introvert. But when you put me out in the world, when I'm like travel Brie comes up and I get more extroverted and I can handle the people, where at home I'm like in my introverted self. So yeah.
I'm laughing because we're, I think, both introverts that happen to be like an
Yeah.
extroverted like careers. So it's like I have done event planning and I also used to teach yoga. It's so funny. I felt like the EBIO was a perfect mix because we got to be our extroverted self, but then we gave so much just like free time that if someone wanted to be an introvert, they could. On a side note, I was like actually sick the whole time, and having a couple hours to myself in the afternoon just to like pass out on the bed was like saved me big time. So yeah, I think we actually did a really good job like structuring it throughout
Yeah.
the day.
Well, and yeah, so we'll get to that in a second, because I think this is sort of leading us to those pros and cons of both styles of retreats. And then what do you do if you do? So I think when you do what's called like a more residential retreat, where you're staying in one spot. So if you have and the desire and adventure of taking people in that more like the Croatia and Iceland retreats I'm talking about, where you were like, we're seeing the country and doing yoga in the mornings in random places, but that actually was really beautiful. We did some like beautiful glacier view, chilly mornings in Iceland that were actually so memorable and lovely. We were in really small town, random little gym area, and it worked. And actually, to be honest, I don't even remember Croatia where we did some of our yoga, because we did spend, I don't, again, off the top of my head, I'm going to say 7 to 8 days, if not 10 days in Croatia. And we spent maybe like 4 days in one spot. That was really nice. And then we traveled around a little bit more. So we actually did a nice balance of staying in one spot and moving around. So there's that type of retreat. But again, I think the majority of people are going to be doing the residential style retreat. And so, yeah, how do you do it? I think the sky's the limit. I think you decide what works for you as a person, your audience, your capacity, what they want. I think there's some retreats out there and people who really want to make it the most like spiritual and magical and like soul changing wild women's retreat type thing. Like there's like that kind of vibe, where I think there's probably less free time, and it's because it's really all about this facilitation. It's probably got a lot of yoga, a lot of meditation, journaling, like that vibe. It's that, if that's your intention and the style that you want to create, you make your schedule according to that outcome and that vibe. For me, I really love the balance of, yes, we do yoga. And no matter what, I feel like on retreat, there's change, growth, evolution, magic that happens just by virtue of being in a different country or going away from your town, even if it's an hour away or it's that day retreat, but spending time out of the routine of your life, doing yoga, like having that routine and being fed, right? Because all these things also, like, you're fed, literally fed on all the levels, but you don't have to make your food, you don't have to go shopping, you're really in receiving mode. That's the power of a retreat. But for me, I'm not a teacher who I'm pausing a little bit because I think for me as a person and a teacher, I really like this balance of, we're going to do our work. We're going to show up. We're going to look at ourselves. We're going to get, like, with kindness and compassion. We're going to do the yoga, not just the physical, but have that reflective yoga side of it. But I'm also not the teacher who's going to guide us on a deep spiritual journey in that sense of the first version that I just mentioned. Because I like to have, because I'm not interested in that. I'm so interested in that, but the way that I want to facilitate people's evolution and growth is actually just giving freedom and space. Like, it's not my job. Like, my job is to still be a teacher and show up and facilitate and hold an overall container that the retreat is. But I know a lot of that self-awareness and magic also happens in the downtime, in the free time. This is also, and that stuff is also a lot of work, right? And I don't know if we're on because I look at it as a yoga vacation, maybe a little bit more, and rather than like a yoga deep work of self. And so that's for me. And I know that as a teacher for myself. So that's how I'm going to make my retreat accordingly and how I'm going to plan the days accordingly. So I hope that makes sense. So I think it's like, know your why. As always, I think when in doubt, why am I, ask ourselves, why am I doing anything? Why am I going to run this retreat? Why do I want to do that? And then what outcome do I want people to have at the end? And how do I want to facilitate during this time? And am I somebody with the capacity to do it? And it's also part of the for us having, the way we structured the day, for example, was we would wake up. There was tea and coffee and some snack service at, I think it was 7:30 in the morning. And then we did yoga at 8. And this also was, we planned that around because it's also the time offering that EBIO had for the brunch and breakfast. So when you're doing a retreat, you're also going to have to be within the parameters of also the retreat center when they offer the meals. So for us, the meals needed to be at, the brunch was 10 a.m., was it?
I believe so. And I remember having this debate with you, like, should we do breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or should we do brunch and dinner? And then we landed on tea service, brunch, and dinner. And I think from the feedback we got, people really appreciated it because there was something for the early risers. So if you're hungry, you're not going in hungry to practice. But then we weren't, like, I felt like I was so stuffed after brunch. There would have been like no way I would even had time for, or like capacity for more food, and it opened up the whole afternoon too, right? So we were kind of like, we spent a lot of time debating food versus time versus,
Mm-hmm. And I think we did a pretty good job with that because I think, so again, so if the tea and coffee and light snack service was at 7:30 to 8, because yoga was at 8. I think the morning we did an hour and a half, so that brought us to 9:30, and that gave because brunch was going to be at 10, so that gave some people time to get dressed, shower, whatever they want, and then we all met for an amazing, you're right, such a full like full brunch, and that's at 10 a.m. to 11, and then roughly, right, it didn't have to officially end at 11. Then, like, if we were to do some sort of lunch, yeah, that would have had to be pretty quickly. Everybody still would have been full, but it also gives people, so just only offering brunch and dinner included in the retreat actually gives people the space, because it ended up being about 5 hours of free time, I think, from 11 to 4 or 5. No, we said 5 because,
Five.
yeah,
Five.
5, because Ebio's dinner was only ever at 7. We couldn't change that time. They were like, we offer dinner at 7 p.m. This is Italy. Dinner is late. So for a lot of our North Americans, I think we're used to eating a little bit earlier, but 7 p.m. is what Ebio said. So that gives us quite a lot of time. And then the free time, because where Ebio is located, you can walk in 30 minutes to a beautiful medieval walled city that city's maybe a generous term, like in a like beautiful walled
Village
medieval
town.
village town that had lovely little shops, that had some restaurants. So some people would walk there and have their own lunch, right? And have the freedom to do that. Or some people with cars went to Siena, that was just nearby, and then they would have lunch at Siena. Other people were full and didn't need it. And I think we also included picnic lunches 2 of the days, which that was maybe our only thing that we didn't love in the end for a variety of reasons. But I love the freedom of all of that free time. And I think for the most part, everybody else did. And in my experience running those types of retreats, that's generally how I've always done it. And I think it's pretty successful. I think it's that really nice balance of facilitated yoga space, meals, and then free time to explore and do what you need to do for your retreat. Because again, I don't want to tell anybody what to do. It's, they're spending a lot of money to go travel to and time off. And we're all beautifully individual. And some people just want to read books all day. Others want to go, do whatever. Like we did a bike tour, which was so magical and lovely and fun. So yeah, with the residential retreats, I think giving people downtime to integrate the work of the yoga, to hang out with other people, to do art, whatever it might be, write, reflect, journal, is pretty powerful and important when we are planning these things.
Yeah, I want to make sure like people triple hear what you said earlier as well, which is like the why of why you're hosting the retreat, because I think that in itself will really dictate the experience that you create. And me being like the operational brain that I am, I really appreciated like the little things that you did, like making sure that there's a schedule posted in the dining room. And I know those things are like, okay, who cares? Why are we talking about this? But knowing your why and then going through what the attendee or guest experience would be like from start to finish. So just like closing your eyes and imagining what it would be like for that person, because I know you and I even talked about like Ebbio is, a very sustainable farm. They're organic. So a lot of their decisions are based around that. So things like towels, like you don't get fresh towels every day because they don't waste water. They're very conscious of those things. So then we have to make a decision. Do we factor in people wanting extra towels? And it seems like this like tiny inconsequential decision, but when you view it from like the guest perspective or the attendee perspective, those little details in the long run do make a difference, right? So there's this like, why are you hosting this, and then also what's the experience you want them to have. And we didn't want people to be hungry, so we chose to have tea in the morning. We also didn't want people to be like trying to do their practice on a stuffed stomach, so that's why we chose to do brunch. Like really just what's the experience you want. And I think, Brie, what you said around like the experience you wanted people to have is time to be themselves and like absorb the work of the practice, and that meant giving people free time. So that's really good.
Yeah. And then but at the same time, like we still did 2 yoga classes a day. Like it wasn't just the one morning. So if that wasn't clear in the rundown of what we did, how we set that up was we had a 5 o'clock yoga class. And that at that time, we just did that one as an hour. There could have still been, I think we could have almost still done both classes as an hour and a half, or maybe next time we do this, the morning is an hour and we do an hour and a half in the evening before, like at the end of the day. And so that's still a lot of yoga. So it's still a nice, and everybody also had the freedom to attend or not attend. There was always times where some people decided like, oh, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to skip out on yoga. Great, cool. Because again, this is your trip. And other people attended every class. And I think having the freedom to have both is important. So it's kind of the perfect schedule. So when anybody is listening to this, I actually found having the 7 p.m. dinner made really good time to fit everything else in, to have that afternoon yoga class. So and have a really generous amount of time in the afternoon and still have the morning yoga. It's yeah. And then I think too, sometimes like, okay, what's your why? Is it a restorative yoga retreat, right? Is it all about like the nervous system? So maybe your 2 yoga classes are actually all just like a lot of lying around, or maybe, like it doesn't, you get to decide how you fill it up. But I think you're right, Ula, there's so many different little things of like, right, having but you don't sometimes if you're a new retreat teacher, you don't know what's missing until you're doing it. For example, with that posting the schedule. And I learned that from Melissa from Breathe in Life on our Croatia and uh, Iceland retreats. She was really good at like having the schedule of each day because I think she learned in her experience, people are always asking, even though you've sent the email with the schedule there, people hopefully looked at it. Nobody remembers. And so you're fielding all these questions of like, well, what are we doing today? What are we doing tomorrow? And with the schedule right there, like, so it's a very small thing, but it's a very big thing about it.
We also did like suggested activities. So people who maybe didn't want to do a ton of planning could just kind of look at it and be like, oh, yeah, I could just walk to that town. And I was thinking like the one day I went on a solo walk, there's like a really famous pilgrim route, and I got to do it by myself. And it was just so beautiful. It was so quiet and meditative. I was like, if we go back, I'm like, we need to do a like meditative walk with the group down there because it's so beautiful. But then again, I think the magic was that we got to do what we wanted, and what I needed that day was just like time in nature, and I got it through that, you know, trail.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, too, keep in mind, once you go to retreats, it also, you can have the best laid plans. Just like if anybody's teaching and you go teach a class and you've like made the best sequence ever in your mind, and then you see the class and who shows up on that day, you're like, ooh, this sequence is not going to land with this particular group of people. I have to pivot. That's going to be a little bit the same with our yoga retreats. So, first of all, describe your retreat as best you can. So, you're not getting people with misaligned intentions and expectations. Please, that nothing is worse than misaligned expectations. So, make sure you're describing and have the schedule on your website. Have the like how the vibe. What are we going to do? How are you going to feel? Experiment or explain that very clearly. And also, too, because I think what you had said, like going for the walk and being alone, and group activities and that balance of such, because like that's why we were very much like nothing, you can do whatever you want in the afternoons. Here's some suggested group activities like the bike guided bike tour around the Tuscan hills, which was we were riding in a postcard. I swear to God, it was amazing. That was an add-on that people paid extra money for, and it was optional. So being able to pivot. So for example, this particular group, and if anybody's listening, I love you. It was so much fun. And I really kind of read the room because I had a little bit more plan that seemed to feel a little bit more of like we did talk about intentions and we did have reflection of maybe like the deeper aspects of yoga. And then I kind of realized, oh, this generally speaking, the majority of this group seems to just be happy to connect with each other in a really like outside of the yoga room space, rather than all of us being in the yoga room and having like deeper discussions or reflections or whatnot. And so I saw that right away and was like, okay, cool. So we'll kind of keep this a little bit more, the yoga practices that we were doing together would be more individualistic in the sense of like everybody's doing their own practice, being led by me, of course. But they did such a beautiful job connecting with each other outside of the yoga room. And so when we come back in April, it'll be a totally different group of people. And maybe this next group will want to have a little bit more of that intention setting, let's say, or some of these other things. So knowing that what to expect, and also being able like clarifying for people who you are as a teacher, what they can expect during the day, and then also being able to pivot as necessary.
Yeah, read the room, I guess. You're really good at pivoting like that. I also, I guess, would take away as a lesson that you don't have to fill every minute. So I guess if you're organizing something, like don't pressure yourself that every minute has to be perfectly planned, because people will do what they want, and giving some free time, I think, was one of the best parts. Not like the best part, but like one of the good things of this retreat. Like everyone's different. There was people who rented cars and wanted to go do like vineyard tours, you know what I mean? So yeah, giving people space.
Yeah.
Okay, me being Miss Operational Brain, Virgo, it's so fun to talk about retreats. The less sexy part, but the part I think everyone needs to hear us talk about, is the prep and the planning and the things that we did to make sure that this was going to be a very successful retreat. And one of them was having an Excel spreadsheet, doing the math. Like, what are some things that you would tell people that are thinking about, or maybe they have in the past planned a retreat but want to do it better? Like, what is something they need to kind of think of as they do this?
First and foremost, and you're right, the unsexy parts, because here we spend all this time oh, and then people are just so happy and, la, 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 we're all having fun. And like the vibes, we were talking vibes. Now it's like, okay, let's actually talk math. Let's talk about realistic things in the back end. So one of the very first and foremost things that you need to do, and this is what I said at the beginning, which was I did a quick math. I saw what my costs were going to be approximately from what the information they gave me. I kind of came up with a number of what I would charge people off the top of my head, and also based on looking like this was the preliminary math. And so I did some quick math and was like, okay, we'll need X amount of people in order to even break even. And sometimes when you're looking at the math and you're like, well, wait a second, let's say the place is, because for us, I think the place was maxed out at 17 people, depending on the room configurations. So if you're at a place where it's like, okay, if we can have room for 17 people at a retreat maxed out, including or not including the facilitators. So, and if it's like, oh, but we only break even at 15, the risk versus reward is a little less exciting. And I would actually go, either you need to increase what you charge people, because now all of a sudden it's requiring 15 people to even break even. That's a lot. And is that worth it? So finding that sweet spot between, and I can't tell you what that sweet spot is. You have to determine what that sweet spot is between how much it's costing you to run the retreat per person, how much your people, or you hope or you think your people will pay and can afford, because maybe your audience is full of billionaires maybe, or millionaires or whatever, and it's like, oh great, I can have this super luxury retreat and charge people $10,000 and I'll make 10,000. I don't know. But for most of us, it's going to be regular people. You're a regular person, we're regular people. So what's that sweet spot of like, okay, I can't charge $10,000 for this retreat because I know most people can't afford that or won't afford that. So what's that sweet spot of like, what it's going to cost? How many people is my break even point? I'm going to recommend, in a perfect world, if you can, don't use PS, don't use this as like gold at all. You figure out your own math, because don't learn math from me. Actually learn yoga and anatomy and movement and business things, but do not learn math from Brianna Johnson. But so I'm going to say this though, with that disclaimer. I think in a perfect world, it's probably smart to, let's say again, you have 17 people and your break even point is like max 10. What do you think, Ula? Like something like that, maybe even 8 people. So then the pressure, anybody past 8 or 10, if it's 17, is you're breathing a little easier. You're not like, oh God, are we gonna fill this and lose money?
Obviously each retreat center will be different, but like what was unique about Ebio, it's this farmhouse from the 1200s, and the rooms, the setup, like we couldn't know if people were going to pay for single room, double, or triple. And so we had to do some fandangling of like, if every single person is a single room, how much is that single room worth? If every, so it does get a little bit complicated. We asked my partner to make us a fancy Excel spreadsheet, because that's his favorite thing in the world. And we had to start factoring in what each person pays for what they get, and it really does change. But also, I will add, factoring in the little tiny costs that don't seem like a lot, that extra towel. We factored in allergies. We assumed everyone had an allergy, and I'm so happy we did, because it just meant that when we were eating, everyone could eat from wherever they wanted. There was no like weird, like, no, don't touch this one bowl kind of a situation. So really starting to do that.
But we were also charged, sorry to jump in, because we were also charged, and I think this is pretty normal, charged on the back end per person. If somebody has like a gluten or dairy or whatever allergy, they were charging, I think, an extra €5, something like that. Not a lot, but when we mathed the price per person, we didn't know if like all 17 people would have an allergy or only 2. So we were just like, let's just include that €5 allergy extra into our mathing of the costs. Complexity is it really was quite complex, because generally speaking, when you're doing a residential retreat, the retreat center is going to have their price of the retreat center itself and everything that they include. like per night of you doing it. And then the food is going to be extra. So I'm just going to make up numbers here. Okay. So let's just imagine that, for easier math, again with my disclaimer, but like something like it's $1,000 per night and you're there for 5 nights. So you know that it's going to cost you $5,000 per, like in total. But then, oh, now they're charging $50 for the meals. And actually, that's a fair and kind of common price, give or take $50 for meals for the day, if not more. God. And so let's just say $50 per day, sorry, thank you, Ula. Yeah, per person, per meal, or let's say it's going to be a little bit different. So let's just go $50 times whatever, how many meals. So then you put that number. And then you're like, okay, the little extras, you're right. Oh, now we have $5 extra here, or oh, to do this one specific type of tour. Or for us, we had a fire, like a bonfire one night, and they charged us for that, you know? So it's like, which is normal. This is fine. And so you get to decide, so then we put the cost of that bonfire, and we had some musicians that came and did a really fun music night for us, and that we had to pay for. And so we did that math ahead of time. Then to break it down, okay, wait a second. So our cost per person with all of these details equals blank amount of dollars. So that's how you figure out what your break even is. So you have to get in and go into what every bit that retreat center is charging you, and then do the math. Also, what's helpful too, then you also go, like Ebio and actually virtually all the retreat centers will, if they're a good one, they're going to be posting the retreats that are being held there. And so you can look at different people's retreats and at the exact same place for the exact same amount of time that you're there, and see what they're charging. And I found it very interesting. People were charging all sorts of different prices. I saw one that was almost double what we charged. And I was like, what the, like, now knowing the costs, like, wow, that's a bold move. But then I kind of looked at the person's retreat and I was like, oh, this is one of those really more intensive retreats where the facilitator, like everybody is together the whole time and they're doing a whole, I don't know, journaling, astrological, I don't know, whatever it was, right? But just something more intensive. Okay, maybe that pricing reflects that. So there's that kind of complex math. The Excel spreadsheet was really nice because then we could kind of figure out what any sort of profit, oh yeah, let alone factoring then your expenses. So how much is it going to cost for you to get there? Do you have somebody you're doing it with? Like what's the cost? And if you're doing an international retreat, please give yourself extra time to not just show up the day before, and actually like give yourself a couple days if you can on either end to get over your jet lag, to calibrate to the place, to be there, and then a couple days at the end to recalibrate. Like, whew, okay, we were just working for this whole time. Now I have a couple days free time. And then, so add that to your cost as well. Don't think that that's not still part of the work. Okay, so if I'm there 3 days ahead of time, I'm going to still have to like book a hotel or Airbnb. How much is that going to cost? I have to book or pay for meals. How much will that cost? Right. So it's a lot of like managing and figuring out details. And if you're listening to this going like, yep, and no more retreats, this is too much work. Here's one other thing that you can do. And again, I'm mostly talking about international retreats because they take that much planning and organization. So does a weekend retreat, of course. You have to do a lot of the same math, of course, but it's a little bit like your expenses will be less because of the travel angle. One of the things that you should really think about, or an easy thing to do, is and I think in places like Mexico, Costa Rica, places like that, I find generally they do it, you like the retreat center will actually just do even more of that stuff, and you don't end up getting paid a lot. It's almost like an exchange. It's like you can just show up as the teacher, teach a free, basically, you're teaching for free, but you get a free trip. That might be a nice practice for the newer retreat teacher, but then I wouldn't stick to that model, because you have the potential to make more money. They're making way more money. You're just like, because your free trip is not a free trip, you're still working. But maybe and for some people that's okay too. So there are ones like that. I feel like I've had places like that reach out to me over the years, and a lot of them tend to be in Mexico or Costa Rica, like those kind of
Do they pay for
places.
your flights and stuff?
Yeah, good question. It's been a lot of years since I've actually even remotely looked at that kind of thing. I think each retreat center will be a little bit different, or maybe depending on how many people show up, because I think some of those ones you're pulling from their audience as well. So if you're a teacher who doesn't necessarily have enough of a community that could or would go on a retreat, international retreat, this is a way to sort of start getting out there and getting that practice. So definitely, I hope that if you're doing that more exchange style retreat, that you are either making enough to cover your flight, or they're covering, like, they're just getting you out there. You're showing up and teaching. You might not know most of the people, but you got this. And if you set it up like the way we talked about it, where it's like yoga in the morning, maybe yoga in the afternoon, and there's this whole free time experience, then maybe you do kind of get a mini vacation because you have those couple hours to yourself each day.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of those. So the moment you mentioned, I was like, wow, that might actually be a really good like intro. So off of that, if someone's listening to this and they're yoga teachers, because we have a lot of yoga teachers obviously listening to our podcast, what is something that they can take away from this chat to maybe start dipping their toes into starting retreats? And I actually know some of our attendees at our own retreat, they were doing like weekend retreats, which I thought was really interesting. And you keep mentioning it. Do you think that's a good start, or like should people start with workshops, or like where would you start?
I think we start, yeah. So I think moving beyond a workshop, I think that's a little bit different. Organization is kind of the same. The math, in a way, is kind of the same. It's less complex, I think, because usually you're just renting a space, or you're splitting with a yoga studio, like 70-30, 60-40, or something like that. So that side of things is a little bit easier. But once you want to start to get into retreat with food and having to organize food and accommodations, I think obviously the first one would definitely be either a day retreat where you can not have to worry about accommodations. It's like, let's say 9 to 5 or something, and you have a lunch provided for people. That's a really nice balance and way in, because maybe you just have to rent a community hall, or you rent a conference room in a nice hotel or something like that, or at your local church basement, right? Any of these locations that could work as a retreat. And then you hire somebody that you know who makes food. Maybe you have somebody in your community or a catering company, and you say, okay, I've got 20 people coming to this. How much would it cost to make 20 vegetarian, gluten free meals? Because that's generally in a day when it's only one meal like that. We would just default to like a nice vegetarian, gluten free, dairy free meal, because that's one meal. It's easier. We don't have to do separate dishes for different allergies, right? And then you go from there, and then you math it out from there, because they're going to charge you their costs. And then you go, okay, if I have to pay $50 per person, and then this room is costing me for the 8 hours X amount, and then how much should I charge? Right. And then you do that, and you're like, okay, that wasn't so bad. I didn't hate the organization. People signed up. This is great. I'm ready to try the next step, which would be doing the weekend retreat. And you can either do, and I've done both many time long time ago, but I've done ones where it's at a retreat center nearby wherever I would be living, and they do the food, they take care of that. Same thing, so sort of like what we talked about already with the international retreats, but just on a smaller scale, 2 nights usually. And or you do them at, you can have, I know there's like cabiny kind of places that you can book out with a kitchen, and then you could do the same thing. Maybe you bring in the person to do the catering and you pay them, so it's kind of the same but different. And then you try that for 2 days, and you go, oh, do I like this? Do I like being with people for 2.5 days? Do I like teaching that much? Do I like the back end rigamarole? Because sometimes, and it's not always the case, but people are people. And sometimes you have to hold their hand with a million questions and emails, and like, right? It's never just showing up at your retreat, and that's the day the work starts. The work starts the day that you put this out in the world, because you have to market it. You have to do your back end expenses and figure out the math. Is this even financially viable for me to do? Well, then you're going to field emails, and then you're going to try to hopefully keep everybody's information organized to being like, Sarah is gluten-free, vegan, doesn't like shellfish, and only wants this room. And that information times by like 18 people of organization. And then, right, and like hopefully you're keeping track of all those details. And then then people might be canceling. And do you have a very clear cancellation policy? And a lot of times, especially on international retreats, that cancellation policy is like, okay, by the 30 days beforehand, you're only getting a 50% discount. I'm making this number up. I can't remember what we have off the top, but sometimes it's 60 days ahead of time and you get a full retreat, maybe minus service fees, because you're on the hook. This is the other side of retreats too. You're on the hook. You've paid a big deposit up front that you're not going to get back. This is also why it's a rigamarole. And can I do it? I'm kind of now downplaying it, going like, don't do it. It feels, but I just want it to be realistic because there are these things that I think teachers don't think about. So that, but that cancellation policy, whether it's a class, a pre-registered workshop, or a retreat of any sort, get clear on the money, because there will be a point, let's say 30 days before your international retreat, I think, and let's say it's 75 per, or maybe you only get 25% of what you paid in full back, because you got to look at it and go, well, wait a second, we're 30 days, we're 15 days out. Us as the retreat people, the likelihood of us filling your spot 15 days, 30 days ahead of time for an international retreat is very small, unless you happen to have a wait list. But then the person who's going to fill that spot has to pay more for their flight. Like, it's like, right, there's all these logistics. So having an airtight cancellation policy and terms and conditions that people have to sign too, not just like that they give, but if you can get them to sign it, then if that ever happens and somebody has to cancel and they're giving you a hard time, because fair, totally fair, they're losing out on all this money, but it's like, well, hey, you knew this going in, we're out your money if we, like, anyway. So there's a lot of things to think about. That all being said, it's also fun and exciting and wonderful.
On that note, the next retreat we're doing is going to be April of 2026 at the same location in Ebio. So, what can people expect this time around? And who do you think this retreat is really for? And why the same place, Brie?
Well, so the last one was in the middle of October. We had the best magical, perfect fall weather. It was so lovely. This one is going to be at the end of April. So we're already going to be and I think in Tuscany at the end of April, it's going to be, hey, I'm not God. I don't know what the weather will be like at any point of the year, right? But theoretically, on average, it's going to be those perfect 20 plus degree temperatures in Celsius, where it's not roasting hot like it would be in July. In Tuscany, you've got the wildflowers. So when we're there, you're going to see all these like beautiful spring wildflowers in the fields. So it's kind of at the end of spring feeling, moving into summer vibes. So you're going to have that like fullness. We've just come out of a dark winter and now we're in magical Tuscany in the spring. So that, I think, is going to be exciting. Who would be there? I don't know. If you like this podcast and you like our approach, you're going to probably really love being in person and having so much fun. And I think that's what I'm really excited about, because as an online teacher, where most of my world is here on Zoom, on the interwebs, to be able to finally meet people. So, for example, our last retreat center, we had a couple people who are alumni of our teacher training. We had a couple people who were longtime Heart and Bones online studio members. And it gives me so much joy to like hug and see each other in person, because I know it's this one-way street really of like, you're consuming my face or my words for a lot of times, and then we're like, oh, and now we're in person, and then, oh my god, we're having so much fun. And I'm really, yeah, so I think if you like Heart and Bones at all, you're gonna like just being in person with us, because I also find, not just me, but like the people who come to it are also really friendly and fun. And I don't want to jinx myself, but I feel like with every teacher training we've had since 2019 or 2018, with virtually all the workshops I've had and retreats over the years, I can't think of a bad, I don't even want to say this. I do. I feel like I'm jinxing myself, but I can't think of a bad experience with like a high maintenance person, or like that kind of like, oh god, oh, or this group is weird, like how did like what's happening. No, I really feel, fingers crossed, that I think it should always continue this way, that we really do attract really awesome people. So anybody who had been on retreats with me in the past and you're listening to this, I love you, and it's great, and we can hug, and it's wonderful. And see, okay, now I'm rambling because I get excited about the in-person together in community. What was your third question,
Before
Ula?
I remind you of it, I was gonna say, also, you don't have to be a teacher to come. You can be a teacher, and you don't have
Oh,
to
good
be a
point.
teacher. I think there's a really good split of people. There are people there who literally lead their own retreats, and they just wanted to have the relaxing side of the retreat. So if you're a teacher, you're so welcome to join. If you're not a teacher and you're a student, you're so welcome to join. If you want to come and do some research
And
on
it
how to lead retreats, come join.
yeah, totally. I'll give you the intel. But and it never feels, from what people tell me, like it never feels like there's a weird division between those who teach and those who don't at these retreats at all. And because it's also the approach of Heart and Bones is we don't, it works really 50-50 perfect for like teachers and non-teachers, because we're not focusing on like, well, now we're going to perfect a one-armed handstand, or I'm not just talking yoga teacher shop talk in a class. It's like we're just doing our practice. So teachers are being nourished and taking a break from teaching, and people who aren't teachers are being nourished and taking a break from their life. Like it's just, yeah. So good point with that, Ula. Nice
Yeah. And
reminder.
then the last question was, why the same place? I feel like we touched on it, but hey, we can go on about it if you want.
Yeah, again, yeah, why the same place? Because I know there's so many other beautiful, amazing retreat centers. If I'm back in the retreat game, and we'll see how, disclaimer, we'll see how long I continue this. I'm riding my own personal wave of enjoyment. And at any point, I might be like, and scene, and I'm retired again. So beyond this, I don't know what's going to happen, if there's going to be another one. So in a way, my first thought is like, well, let's go to a different place because there's so many other amazing places. But at the same time, Ebio was so, again, magical and special, and the people who run it and the story behind it and the land itself and the location and all the food, the people, like it was really, I got a lot out of it just being there, and enough that, yeah, within days of leaving, I was like, and when do we come back? I want to be back in this space, in this place itself. And yeah, so it's almost like that physical body, yes, that I talked about at the beginning, that I tune into and check into. I do that a lot when I travel. There's some places in the world where somatically I'm like, oh, okay, intellectually this is beautiful, but like, I am not, this is not my, like, I don't feel in my body that I love this place. Ebbio, Tuscany area, that was the first time I'd ever been there. I might, just for me personally, I had a really beautiful physical, like, oh yeah, this is a home. This is nice.
Mhm. Lovely. On that note, I will leave the link in the description if you're curious and you want to learn a little bit more about the upcoming retreat for 2026. I will also in the description leave information of how you can join us in the online studio for $1 for the month. Is there anything else you want to chime in or add on, Brie?
Yeah, if you're watching this video, because of course you listen to it wherever you listen to your podcast, but we also always have this as a video version on YouTube, on Yoga Teacher Tips YouTube. If you have questions, or like as you listen to this, please put in the comments or head there, even if you listen to this in your ears as a podcast. Go to Yoga Teacher Tips and go to the comments and leave any questions, because Ula and I are there and we love answering the comments. So if you have further questions about, like, because I know we really talked a lot. This was actually, our intention was to make this a shorter
About by half.
podcast episode. But in the end, I guess there's so many things. So if you have questions about it, go ahead and put them in the comments and we'll help answer on YouTube for you.
Okay, well, thank you, Brie.
Thank you, Ula.